The trading station of Velcor 9 hung in the void like a rusted crown, its outer ring scarred by centuries of commerce and conflict. Neon advertisements flickered in a dozen alien languages, promising pleasures, weapons, and fortunes to those who could afford them. The air inside the main concourse tasted of recycled oxygen and desperation, thick with the smell of exotic fuels and the musk of 100 different species. Lyra pressed herself against the cold metal wall near the eastern gate, her small fingers clutching the scanner to her chest. She was 7 solar years old, though malnutrition made her look younger. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around a face that was all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. The clothes she wore, a patched thermal suit 3 sizes too large, had once been grey, but now they were the colour of station grime and old tears. "Buy my scanner, sir," she whispered to a passing Krythaxian warrior. Her voice was hoarse from hours of begging. "Please, my mommy hasn't eaten in 2 cycles." The warrior didn't even glance down. His scaled hide was the colour of burnished copper, and his ceremonial armour gleamed with the kill marks of a dozen campaigns. To him, Lyra was less than the dust on his boots. Humans were vermin, weak, useless. The Krythaxian Empire had conquered 600 worlds, and humanity's pitiful resistance had lasted barely 3 months before they surrendered. Lyra watched him disappear into the crowd, his heavy footfalls echoing long after he was gone. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned to the next passerby, a Velcarian merchant with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the station lights like fractured mirrors. "Please, ma'am," Lyra said, holding up the scanner. "It still works. My mama fixed it herself. She's really good at fixing things. She just needs—" The Velcarian clicked her mandibles in annoyance and sidestepped Lyra as if she carried plague. A few of the merchant's entourage laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Lyra's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Mama had told her not to cry. Crying wasted water, and water was expensive on Velcor 9. Everything was expensive. Food, medicine, hope. She looked down at the scanner in her hands. It was an old Terran navigation unit, the kind that miners used to use before the war. The casing was cracked, and someone had soldered the power cell back together with copper wire, but the display still glowed a faint blue when she pressed the activation stud. Mama had worked on it for 3 days straight, her hands shaking from hunger, her eyes red from sleeplessness. "This will get us enough credits for food," Mama had said, her voice thin as paper. "You take it to the concourse, baby. Find someone kind. There are still kind people in the galaxy." But Lyra was beginning to doubt that. The station's artificial sun dimmed to simulate evening cycle, and the crowd began to thin. Lyra's stomach cramped with hunger, a familiar pain, dull and persistent like a second heartbeat. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and that had been nothing but a handful of protein paste she'd found discarded near the waste recyclers. She slumped against the wall and hugged the scanner tighter. Maybe tomorrow someone would stop. "Move along, human." Lyra looked up to see a station security drone hovering above her, its red sensor eye fixed on her face. The mechanical voice was cold and efficient. "Unauthorized solicitation is prohibited in Sector 7. You have 10 seconds to vacate this area, or you will be removed by force." "I'm not soliciting," Lyra said quickly, scrambling to her feet. "I'm selling." "Here it's different. I have a license." "You have 5 seconds." Lyra ran. She darted through the crowd, her worn boots slapping against the metal grating. The drone followed for a moment, then lost interest and returned to its patrol route. Lyra didn't stop running until she reached the maintenance corridors, the forgotten veins of Velcor 9, where the station's poorest residents eked out their existence. The corridor was narrow and dark, lit only by failing strip lights that flickered like dying stars. The walls were slick with condensation, and the air smelled of mold and engine coolant. Lyra counted the doors as she passed them, her breath coming in short gasps. 17, 18, 19. She stopped at the 20th door and pressed her palm against the scanner panel. It beeped once, recognizing her biometrics, and the door slid open with a hiss of escaping air. The compartment beyond was barely large enough to qualify as living space. A single bunk bed was bolted to one wall, its thin mattress stained and sagging. A portable heating unit sat in the corner, its coils glowing faintly. A makeshift table fashioned from scrap metal held a few dented cooking pots and a near-empty water canister, and on the bunk, wrapped in a threadbare thermal blanket, was Mama. Sarah Chen had once been beautiful. Lyra remembered seeing pictures of her from before the war, before the station, before everything fell apart. In those pictures, Mama smiled, Her eyes were bright. Her skin was smooth and healthy. Now, Mama's face was gaunt. Her skin stretched tight over her skull. Her eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles that looked like bruises. Her black hair, once thick and lustrous, lay in brittle strands across the pillow. She was 32 years old, but she looked twice that. "Baby?" Mama's voice was barely a whisper. She tried to sit up, but the effort made her cough, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to shake her entire body. "I'm here, Mama." Lyra rushed to her side and set the scanner on the table. She poured water from the canister into a cup and held it to Mama's lips. "Drink, please." Sarah drank slowly, her hands too weak to hold the cup. When she finished, she lay back against the pillow and closed her eyes. "Did you sell it?" she asked. Lyra bit her lip. "Not yet, but I will, tomorrow, I promise." Sarah's eyes opened, and for a moment, they focused on Lyra with perfect clarity. "You don't have to lie to me, baby. I know it's hard." "It's not hard," Lyra insisted, forcing brightness into her voice. "I just need to find the right person. Someone who needs a scanner, someone with credits." Sarah reached out and touched Lyra's cheek with trembling fingers. "You're so brave. So much braver than I ever was." "You're brave, Mama. You're the bravest person I know." Sarah smiled, a sad, fragile thing. "When I was your age, I lived on Earth, in a city called Seattle. We had trees there, real trees, not the synthetic ones they grow on stations, and rain. So much rain." Her eyes drifted closed again. "I used to complain about the rain. Can you imagine? Now I'd give anything to feel it on my face." Lyra didn't know what rain felt like. She'd been born on Velcor 9. She'd never seen Earth, never seen real trees, never breathed air that didn't taste like recycled metal. "Tell me about the trees," Lyra said softly, but Mama was already asleep. Lyra pulled the blanket up to Mama's chin and sat on the floor beside the bunk. She picked up the scanner and turned it over in her hands, studying the worn casing and the tangle of wires visible through the cracks. Somewhere in the galaxy, she knew, there were people who had enough to eat, people who didn't have to beg, people who didn't watch their mothers waste away from hunger and sickness. But those people weren't human, and they didn't care. Lyra set the scanner down and curled up on the cold floor, her stomach gnawing at itself. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow someone would stop. Tomorrow someone would be kind. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. The hours crawled by in the darkness. Lyra drifted in and out of sleep, her dreams filled with faceless aliens who walked past her without seeing, without caring. She dreamed of food, steaming bowls of rice like Mama used to make back when they had credits, fresh fruit she'd only seen in pictures, water that didn't taste like rust and chemicals. When she woke, her mouth was dry and her head throbbed. Mama was still sleeping, her breathing shallow and uneven. Lyra touched her forehead and felt the fever burning there. They needed medicine, they needed food, they needed help, but help never came for humans on Velcor 9. Lyra stood on shaky legs and checked the water canister. Less than a quarter full, maybe 2 days' worth if they were careful. She allowed herself 3 small sips, then set it aside. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she'd learned to ignore it. Pain was just another part of living. She picked up the scanner and examined it again in the dim light. The device was old, but Mama had repaired it with care and skill. Sarah Chen had been one of the best engineers in the Terran colonial fleet before the war. She'd designed navigation systems for colony ships, built atmospheric processors for new worlds, solved problems that made other engineers give up. Now she was dying in a maintenance corridor on a forgotten trading station, and nobody cared. Lyra tucked the scanner under her arm and kissed Mama's forehead. "I'll be back soon," she whispered. "I promise." She slipped out of the compartment and made her way back to the concourse. The morning cycle had just begun, and the station was coming to life. Cargo haulers rumbled past, their repulsor fields humming. Merchants opened their stalls, displaying goods from across the galaxy. The smell of cooking food drifted from a nearby cantina, and Lyra's stomach clenched so hard she had to stop and lean against a wall until the dizziness passed. She found her usual spot near the western gate and held up the scanner. Her voice came out small and hoarse, but she kept trying. "Scanner for sale. Good condition. Only 50 credits." The crowd flowed around her like water around a stone. A Krythaxian officer shoved past her without a glance. A Velcarian trader examined her with compound eyes, then chittered something that might have been laughter before moving on. A group of human laborers saw her and quickly looked away, their faces full of pity and helplessness. An hour passed, then 2. The artificial sun climbed higher, and the concourse grew hotter, Sweat trickled down Lyra's back despite the chill in her bones. She kept calling out, kept holding up the scanner, kept hoping. "Please," she said to a passing merchant. "My mama is sick. We just need food." The merchant, a tall, thin alien with purple skin and too many joints in his arms, paused. For a moment, Lyra thought he might actually stop, but then he shook his head and continued walking, muttering something in a language she didn't understand. Lyra's vision blurred. Whether from tears or hunger or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. She sank down against the wall. The scanner clutched to her chest and wondered how much longer she could keep doing this. How much longer before Mama's fever consumed her completely? How much longer before... Human child. The voice was deep and resonant, with the characteristic growl of a Krythaxian. Lyra looked up, squinting against the station lights. He was young for a Krythaxian warrior, maybe only 20 cycles old, still in his first decade of imperial service. His scaled hide was a deep bronze that seemed to shift colors in the light, and his armor was black and unadorned except for 3 small kill marks etched near the shoulder. His eyes were gold with vertical pupils, and they studied her with an intensity that made her shrink back. "Buy my scanner, sir," Lyra said automatically, her voice cracking. "Please. My mommy hasn't eaten in 2 cycles." The warrior said nothing. He towered over her, easily 7 feet tall, his presence radiating the casual power of a predator species. One of his hands rested on the plasma pistol at his hip. The other hung loose at his side, clawed fingers twitching slightly. Lyra held up the scanner with trembling hands. "It works. It's a good scanner. My mama fixed it. She's really good at fixing things. She used to work for the colonial fleet before—" "How much?" the warrior interrupted. Lyra blinked. "What? How much do you want for it?" Hope flared in Lyra's chest, bright and painful. 50 credits, that's all. Just 50. The warrior reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a credit chit. He pressed his thumb against it, and the display lit up with a number that made Lyra's breath catch. 500 credits. "This is too much," Lyra said, even as her hands reached for it. "I only need 50. I don't want to cheat." "Take it," the warrior said. His voice was hard, but something in his golden eyes was not. "Buy food. Buy medicine. Buy whatever your mother needs." Lyra's fingers closed around the credit chit, and for a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the small piece of plastic that represented more money than she'd seen in years. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. I don't know how to—" But the warrior was already turning away. "Wait," Lyra called out. "Your scanner. You paid for it." The warrior glanced back over his shoulder. "Keep it. I don't need it." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with long, purposeful strides. Lyra stood there for a long moment, the credit chit in one hand and the scanner in the other, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. 500 credits. 500. That was enough for food for weeks. Medicine, water, maybe even passage off this station if they saved carefully. She ran. She ran through the concourse, past the merchants and the traders and the security drones. The credit chit clutched so tightly in her fist that her knuckles went white. She ran to the nearest supply depot and bought protein packs, water purification tablets, fever medication, vitamin supplements. She bought everything the clerk would sell her, watching in amazement as the credit balance dropped, but stayed well above 0. Then she ran home, her arms full of supplies, her heart full of something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Mama was awake when Lyra burst through the door. Sarah tried to sit up, alarm crossing her gaunt face. "Lyra, what happened? Did someone hurt you?" "No, Mama." Lyra dumped the supplies on the table, laughing and crying at the same time. Look what I got. Food and medicine and water. A warrior bought the scanner and he gave me 500 credits, Mama. 500. Sarah stared at the supplies, her eyes going wide. 500. Lyra, that's not possible. Scanners don't sell for... He gave it to me anyway. Lyra ripped open a protein pack and thrust it at her mother. "Eat, Mama. Please eat." Sarah took the food with shaking hands. She bit into it, and tears rolled down her cheeks as she chewed. Real food. Actual protein, not scraps or discarded waste or near-expired ration bars. Lyra opened the medicine and read the instructions carefully. Fever reducer, immune booster, pain management. She measured out the correct doses and helped Mama take them with fresh, clean water. For the first time in longer than Lyra could remember, she saw hope in her mother's eyes. "Who was this warrior?" Sarah asked softly. "What was his name?" Lyra realized she'd never asked. "I don't know. He just helped. He didn't have to, but he did. Sarah pulled Lyra close, holding her tight despite her weakness. Maybe there are still kind people in the galaxy after all. Lyra closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of her mother, sweat and sickness and love. Outside their tiny compartment, the station hummed with life. Somewhere out there, a young Krythaxian warrior was walking away from an act of compassion his people would call weakness. But for the first time in years, Lyra Chen allowed herself to believe that the galaxy might not be entirely cruel. Vorak stood in the observation deck of the Krythaxian battle cruiser, Crimson Talon, staring out at the infinite dark. Stars glittered like broken glass against the void, cold and distant, beautiful and merciless. Like everything else in the universe, he couldn't stop thinking about the child. 3 days had passed since his encounter on Velcor 9, and still her face haunted him. Those hollow cheeks, those desperate eyes, that voice cracked and small begging for something as simple as food. "Buy my scanner, sir. My mummy hasn't eaten in 2 cycles." Vorak clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. He was a warrior of the Krythaxian Empire. He'd been trained since hatching to be strong, to be ruthless, to show no weakness. Compassion was for lesser species. Sentiment was the poison that destroyed empires. And yet, "Daydreaming, Vorak," the voice came from behind him, sharp and mocking. Vorak turned to see Commander Thrakis approaching, his crimson scales gleaming in the observation deck's low light. Thrakis was twice Vorak's age, and 3 times as decorated. His armor bore 47 kill marks, each one representing a sentient being he'd killed in personal combat. His eyes were the cold yellow of ancient ice. "No, Commander," Vorak said, straightening to attention. "Just observing." "Observing what? The empty void?" Thrakis moved to stand beside him, his massive frame blocking part of the viewport. "Or perhaps you're still thinking about that pathetic display on the station." Vorak's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean, Commander." "Don't play stupid with me, whelp. You gave credits to a human beggar. 500 credits. Thrakis's voice dripped with contempt. "Do you have any idea how that makes you look? How it makes our entire unit look? It was my money to spend as I wished. It was a waste." Thrakis leaned closer, his breath hot and reeking of fermented meat. "Humans are vermin, Vorak. They're weak, pathetic. They surrendered to us after 3 months of fighting. 3 months. The Velcarians held out for 6 years. The Draconians fought us for a decade. But humans," he spat on the floor, "they rolled over and showed their bellies like frightened animals." "The child was starving," Vorak said quietly. "So?" Thrakis laughed, a sound like tearing metal. "Let it starve. Natural selection. The weak die so the strong can thrive. That's how evolution works. That's how the universe works. You dishonor yourself by coddling them." Vorak said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't get him court-martialed or challenged to a blood duel. Thrakis outranked him. Thrakis was a hero of the Empire, and Vorak was just a third-year warrior with barely any kills to his name. "You're dismissed," Thrakis said, waving a clawed hand. "Go meditate on your weakness, and next time you see a human begging, step on it." Vorak left the observation deck, his scales burning with humiliation and anger. He walked through the ship's corridors, past other warriors who gave him sidelong glances and knowing smirks. Word had spread quickly. Everyone knew what he'd done. Everyone knew he was soft. He reached his quarters and sealed the door behind him. The room was small and austere. A sleeping platform, a weapons locker, a terminal for accessing ship systems. Standard accommodations for a low-ranking warrior. Vorak sat on the platform and put his head in his hands. Why had he done it? He'd been returning from a failed patrol mission in the outer sectors. Nothing had gone right. No action, no glory, just weeks of scanning empty space and listening to his squadmates complain. When they docked at Velcor 9 for resupply, he'd gone to the concourse to clear his head, and then he'd seen her. Small, fragile, starving, everything his training told him to despise. And yet when she'd looked up at him with those dark eyes and said please, something inside him had broken. Or maybe it had awakened. Vorak stood and moved to his terminal. He accessed the ship's database and entered a search query, Human Terror History. The results flooded the screen, thousands of files, reports, tactical analyses from the war. He started reading. Humans were classified as a Class 3 sentient species. Average lifespan, 80 to 90 solar years. Average height, 5 to 6 feet. No natural armor, no venom, no enhanced strength or speed. They were soft-bodied creatures who could be killed by a fall, by starvation, by exposure to mild temperature extremes. By Krythaxian standards, they were absurdly fragile, and yet they'd colonized 47 worlds before the war. Vorak kept reading, his interest growing. Humans had no unified government, dozens of factions constantly bickering and competing. They had no advanced biotechnology like the Velkarians, no psychic abilities like the Mentari, no battle-born culture like the Krythaxians. What they had was creativity, adaptability, a stubborn refusal to accept limitations. The reports detailed humanity's first contact with the Krythaxian Empire. The humans had tried diplomacy first. They'd sent ambassadors, offered trade agreements, proposed peaceful coexistence. The Empire had responded by annexing 3 of their colony worlds and killing everyone who resisted. So the humans fought back. They fought with improvised weapons and guerrilla tactics. They fought with captured Krythaxian technology they reverse-engineered in weeks. They fought with a desperation and ferocity that surprised even the Empire's most seasoned commanders. For 3 months, they held the line against an enemy that had conquered 600 worlds. But in the end, they lost. How could they not? The Krythaxian Empire had 1,000 battlecruisers, 10,000 warriors, weapons that could crack planets. Humanity had courage and stubbornness, but those things don't stop plasma fire. The human governments surrendered. The survivors scattered across the galaxy, refugees in a universe that saw them as nothing more than cheap labor and objects of contempt, like the child on Velkor 9. Vorak closed the files and leaned back in his seat. His people called humans weak, but was surviving against impossible odds. Weak was continuing to live, to hope, to try after everything had been taken from you. Weak. He thought about his own hatching. He'd been born into a military creche, trained from the moment he could walk. He'd been given everything he needed: food, shelter, purpose. He'd never known hunger, never known real fear, never had to beg for his life or the life of someone he loved. What would he be if he'd been born human? Would he have survived? Would he have had the strength to keep going when the entire galaxy told him he was worthless? A chime sounded at his door. Vorak straightened, clearing the terminal screen. "Enter." The door slid open, and a young Krythaxian warrior stepped inside. His name was Krell, and he was one of the few members of Vorak's unit who didn't treat him with open contempt. "Vorak," Krell said, his voice low, "you need to be careful. Thrakis is talking about reporting you to the captain, says you're a liability, says you've been compromised by alien sentiment." "I gave credits to a starving child," Vorak said. "That's not a crime. Maybe not officially, but you know how the Empire works. Perception is everything. If enough people think you're weak, you might as well be." Krell glanced over his shoulder, then stepped closer. "Look, I don't care what you do with your money, but you need to keep your head down. Do your job. Stop drawing attention." "I am doing my job." "Are you?" Krell's eyes narrowed. "Because I heard you requested access to restricted files about human colony massacres. That's not exactly keeping a low profile." Vorak's scales went cold. He had requested those files, but he'd thought his clearance was sufficient. Apparently not. "I was just curious," Vorak said carefully. "Curious about what?" "About who we're fighting, about why we do what we do." Krell stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You're asking dangerous questions, brother. The Empire doesn't reward curiosity. It rewards obedience." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Just be careful. There are warriors on this ship who'd kill you for a promotion. Don't give them an excuse." After Krell left, Vorak sat alone in the darkness, his mind churning. He'd never questioned the Empire before, never doubted his place in the grand design. He was a warrior. Warriors fought. Warriors conquered. That was the natural order. But now he couldn't stop seeing that child's face, couldn't stop hearing her voice, couldn't stop wondering how many other children were starving on how many other stations, while Krythaxian warriors walked past without caring. He accessed the terminal again, this time searching for something specific. Colony massacre. Velkor sector. 10 years ago. The file was heavily redacted, but the basic facts were there. A human settlement called New Seattle had been established on a barren moon in the Velkor sector. 3,000 colonists, families, engineers, farmers, scientists. They'd been there for 5 years, terraforming the moon, building a new home. Then the Krythaxian Empire arrived. The official report claimed the humans had fired first, that they'd attacked an Imperial patrol and therefore qualified as hostile combatants. The Empire's response had been swift and decisive. The colony was destroyed. No survivors. But as Vorak read deeper, he found inconsistencies, patrol logs that didn't match the official timeline, weapon signatures that suggested the humans had been unarmed, testimony from a junior officer that had been sealed and classified. Someone was lying. Vorak sat back, his heart pounding in his chest. If the Empire had massacred an unarmed colony, that wasn't conquest. That wasn't war. That was murder. And if they'd lied about it in the official records, what else had they lied about? He thought about the child again. Her name. He still didn't know her name, but he knew she was human. He knew she was on Velcor 9, and Velcor 9 was in the same sector where New Seattle had been destroyed. Was that a coincidence? Vorak made a decision that would change everything. He stood, grabbed his personal sidearm, and left his quarters. He walked through the ship until he reached the docking bay, where the short-range shuttles were kept. He filed a requisition for a 48-hour shore leave, citing personal business. The quartermaster barely glanced at the request before approving it. Low-ranking warriors were given wide latitude for shore leave, especially after long patrols. As long as Vorak was back before the Crimson Talon departed the sector, nobody would care what he did. 2 hours later, Vorak was back on Velcor 9. The station looked the same as it had 3 days ago, crowded, dirty, full of desperate beings trying to survive. Vorak made his way to the concourse, scanning the crowd. He didn't know where the child lived, didn't know her name or her mother's name. All he had was a memory of her face and the knowledge that she'd been trying to sell a scanner. He asked around, carefully. A Velcarian merchant remembered seeing a human child begging near the western gate. A station worker mentioned Maintenance Corridor 20, where a lot of human refugees lived. Vorak followed the trail, feeling more like a hunter than he liked to admit. The maintenance corridors were worse than he'd imagined. Dark, moldy. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of decay. Vorak had to duck to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. He passed door after door, each one sealed, each one hiding another story of survival and desperation. He almost missed it. Door 20. No markings, no signs. Just a worn biometric scanner and a faint hum of failing power systems. Vorak stood outside for a long moment, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What did he hope to accomplish? He was a Krythaxian warrior, trained to kill, standing outside the home of the beings his people had conquered and scattered. He raised his fist and knocked. Silence. He knocked again, harder this time. The door slid open a crack, and a small face peered out. Dark eyes, hollow cheeks. Recognition. You, the child whispered. Hello, Vorak said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. I need to talk to your mother. The child, Lyra, he would learn later, stared up at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. Then she opened the door wider. Mama, she called over her shoulder. The warrior is here. From inside the compartment, a weak voice answered. What warrior? The one who gave us the credits. There was a long pause. Then, let him in. Vorak stepped inside, and his heart sank at what he saw. The compartment was tiny, barely large enough for 2 people. The air was stale and cold. A portable heater glowed weakly in one corner, and on a narrow bunk, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, was a human woman who looked like she was dying. But when she turned to look at him, her eyes were sharp and clear and full of intelligence. You're the one who helped my daughter, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Vorak said. Why? It was the same question Vorak had been asking himself for 3 days. Why had he stopped? Why had he given her his credits? Why was he here now, risking his career and possibly his life? He looked at the woman, Sarah, though he didn't know her name yet. He looked at the child standing protectively beside her mother's bunk. He looked at the evidence of their suffering and their strength, and for the first time in his life, Vorak told the truth. Because I think my people have done something terrible, he said quietly, and I need to know what it was. Sarah Chen stared at the Krythaxian warrior standing in her home, and slowly, carefully, she began to smile. Then sit down, warrior, she said. I have a story to tell you. And when I'm done, you're going to wish you'd never asked. Sarah Chen watched the Krythaxian warrior fold himself into the small space of her compartment, his massive frame making everything seem even more cramped. He moved with the controlled grace of a predator, but there was something in his golden eyes that she hadn't seen in any other Krythaxian. Doubt, maybe even guilt. Good, she could work with that. Lyra, Sarah said softly, her voice still weak from fever, get our guest some water. Lyra hesitated, her small body positioned between her mother and the warrior, as if she could somehow protect Sarah from a being that could tear her apart with one hand. But then she nodded and moved to the makeshift table, pouring water from their canister into a dented metal cup. Vorak took the cup carefully, his claws clicking against the metal. He drank, and Sarah saw surprise flicker across his reptilian features. "It's clean," he said. "Thanks to you," Sarah replied. "The credits you gave Lyra bought us water purification tablets, medicine, food." She paused, studying him. "Why did you do it?" "I already told you, I think—" "No." Sarah cut him off, her voice gaining strength despite her exhaustion. "I don't want the philosophical answer. I want the real one. What made you stop? What made you see her when thousands of your people walk past humans every day without a second glance?" Vorak was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I don't know. Maybe because she reminded me that I have a choice. A choice. To be what I was trained to be, or to be something else." Sarah laughed, a bitter, painful sound that made her cough. Lyra rushed to her side with more water, and Sarah drank gratefully. When the coughing subsided, she looked at Vorak with hard eyes. "Do you know what happened to New Seattle?" she asked. Vorak's scales shifted color slightly, darkening. "I read the official report. The colony attacked an Imperial patrol. The Empire responded. The official report is a lie. I suspected as much." Sarah's expression shifted, surprise breaking through her exhaustion. "You suspected? The timeline doesn't match. The weapon signatures don't match. There are too many classified sections, too many redacted names." Vorak leaned forward, his massive hands clasped together. "I've been a warrior for 4 years. I've seen combat. I know what battle reports look like, and that report looks like a cover-up." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're smarter than you look, warrior. What's your name?" "Vorak, 3rd rank, Crimson Talon Battle Group." "Sarah Chen, former chief engineer, Terran Colonial Fleet." "And you're right, it was a cover-up." She shifted on the bunk, wincing with pain. "New Seattle was my home, Vorak. I lived there with my husband and daughter, 3,000 of us, trying to build something beautiful on a dead rock. We were farmers and teachers and engineers. We had children. We had hope." Her voice cracked and Lyra took her hand, squeezing tight. "We knew the Krythaxian Empire was expanding," Sarah continued. "We'd heard the reports from other colonies, but we thought we were too small to matter, too remote, too insignificant." She laughed again, that same bitter sound. "We were wrong." "What happened?" Vorak asked quietly. "Your fleet arrived without warning. No communication, no demands, no chance to surrender. They just opened fire." Sarah's eyes were distant now, seeing something far beyond the walls of the compartment. "The orbital bombardment lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes to destroy everything we'd built. Our homes, our fields, our futures." Lyra was crying silently, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. Sarah pulled her close with one thin arm. "Most people died in the first strike," Sarah said. "The lucky ones. My husband Marcus was working in the agricultural dome when it collapsed. He died instantly. I was in the engineering bay with Lyra. We survived because I'd built emergency shelters into the foundation, against regulations, against budget, because I'm paranoid, and I like to be prepared." "How many survived?" Vorak asked. 43 of us. We huddled in those shelters while your people hunted the rest. I could hear the screaming over the comm channels, people begging for mercy, children crying for their parents. Your warriors showed them no compassion, Vorak. They executed anyone they found, hunted them like animals. Vorak's claws dug into his palms. Why? Because they could. Because we were weak. Because in the eyes of the Krythaxian Empire, we don't matter. Sarah's voice was hard now, full of a rage that fever and starvation couldn't diminish. "But I'm an engineer, Vorak, and engineers solve problems. So while we hid in those shelters, I accessed the colony's main computer core. I downloaded everything. Communication logs, sensor data, visual records. Everything that proved we never fired on your patrol. Everything that proved this was an unprovoked massacre." She paused, looking at the scanner on the table. The same scanner Lyra had been trying to sell. "I encrypted the data and hid it in the most innocuous place I could think of. An old mining scanner. Something so common, so worthless, that nobody would look at it twice." Sarah smiled grimly. "Then I waited for our chance to escape." "How did you get off the planet?" Vorak asked. "There was a supply ship that came weekly from Velcor 9. Independent trader didn't care about imperial politics as long as he got paid. When the bombardment was over and your fleet moved on, thinking everyone was dead, we sent a distress signal on private channels. The trader came, picked up the survivors, and brought us here. Why didn't you go to Earth, to the Terran authorities?" Sarah laughed, and this time there was genuine amusement in it. "There are no Terran authorities anymore, Vorak. Don't you know? After the war, humanity's governments collapsed. No unity, no power, no way to fight back. We're scattered across 1,000 stations and colonies, just trying to survive. I brought the evidence to Velcor 9 because I thought I could find someone who would care, someone who would help us get the truth out. But nobody helped. Nobody even looked. I tried for years. Went to news services, diplomatic channels, even contacted other alien species. Nobody wants to challenge the Krythaxian Empire. Nobody wants to risk making an enemy of the most powerful military force in the galaxy." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "So I kept the data safe, kept my daughter alive, and waited. For what? For someone like you." The words hung in the air between them. Vorak stared at Sarah, understanding dawning in his golden eyes. "You want me to expose this," he said. "I want justice. I want the truth. I want the galaxy to know what your people did." Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, her eyes blazing with an intensity that defied her dying body. "But more than that, Vorak, I want it to matter. I don't want my husband's death to be meaningless. I don't want those 3,000 people to be forgotten. If I do this, they'll kill me. Court-martial, execution, or just an accident during the next patrol." "Yes," Sarah said simply. "They probably will. Then why would I help you?" It was Lyra who answered. The little girl stepped forward, her small face set with determination that echoed her mother's. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said. "My mama says that being strong isn't about how big you are or how many people you can hurt. It's about standing up when it's hard, about helping when nobody else will." She looked up at Vorak with those dark, solemn eyes. "You helped me. You didn't have to, but you did, because you're strong in the way that matters." Vorak looked at this child, this small, fragile human child who should have been broken by everything she'd endured, and saw more courage than he'd encountered in most warriors. "Show me the data," he said. Sarah nodded to Lyra, who picked up the scanner and brought it to Vorak. He turned it over in his hands, examining the worn casing and crude repairs. "How do I access it?" he asked. "You'll need a Krythaxian military terminal," Sarah said. "The encryption keys are tied to Imperial access codes. I designed it that way deliberately. The only people who can decrypt the data are the same people who committed the crime." "Clever. Like I said, I'm good at solving problems." Sarah lay back against the pillow, exhausted by the conversation. "Take the scanner, Vorak. Take it back to your ship. Access the data, and then decide what kind of warrior you want to be." Vorak stood, his head nearly touching the low ceiling. He slipped the scanner into a pouch on his belt and looked down at Sarah and Lyra. "If I do this, if I expose the truth, it won't bring your husband back. It won't undo what happened." "No," Sarah agreed, "but it might save someone else. It might make your people think twice before they massacre another colony, and that's worth dying for, even if it kills me, even if it kills us all." Vorak studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll access the data. I'll see what's there. But I make no promises beyond that. That's all I ask." As Vorak turned to leave, Lyra caught his arm. Her small hand couldn't even wrap halfway around his forearm, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping, for seeing us, for caring." Vorak looked down at her, and something in his chest ached. "What's your name, child?" "Lyra. Lyra Chen." "Lyra Chen," Vorak repeated. He gently placed one clawed hand on her head, careful not to hurt her. "You have your mother's courage, and my father's stubbornness," Lyra said with a small smile. Vorak left the compartment and made his way back through the maintenance corridors, his mind churning. The scanner felt heavy in his pouch, weighted with more than just data. It carried the truth, the evidence, the proof that his people, his empire, had committed an atrocity, and now he had to decide what to do with it. He returned to Velcor 9's docking bay and boarded the shuttle back to the Crimson Talon. The flight took less than an hour, but it felt like days. When he arrived, he went straight to his quarters and sealed the door. Vorak pulled out the scanner and connected it to his terminal using a standard data interface. The screen flickered, then filled with encryption warnings and access prompts. He entered his military credentials, and the system began processing. After a moment, the screen cleared and a message appeared. "Enter override code to decrypt classified data." Vorak frowned. He didn't have an override code. He was a third-rank warrior, barely above a rookie. He had standard access credentials, but nothing that would unlock classified Imperial files. He tried several standard override codes that were common knowledge among warriors. None of them worked. He tried his commanding officer's codes, which he'd memorized from watching Thrakis enter them dozens of times. Still nothing. Vorak sat back, frustrated. Sarah had said the encryption was tied to Imperial access codes, but she hadn't mentioned that he'd need override authority to decrypt the data. This would require... "Computer," Vorak said aloud, "show me the access requirements for this encrypted file." The terminal displayed a list of codes and clearance levels. Vorak's eyes widened as he read them. The data was encrypted with command-level security. Only officers with the rank of captain or higher could access it. He'd have to steal a captain's credentials, or find another way to break the encryption, or... A chime sounded at his door. Vorak quickly disconnected the scanner and hid it under his sleeping platform. "Enter." The door opened, and Krell stepped inside, his expression grim. "Vorak, we need to talk. Now." "About what?" "About the fact that Commander Thrakis just filed a formal complaint against you. He's accusing you of consorting with humans, accessing restricted files without authorization, and conduct unbecoming of a Krythaxian warrior." Krell moved closer, lowering his voice. "There's going to be an inquiry, maybe a tribunal. You need to prepare a defense." Vorak's scales went cold. "When?" "Tomorrow. They're moving fast on this one." Krell looked around the small quarters, as if checking for listening devices. "What have you been doing, brother? What's worth risking everything for?" Vorak wanted to tell him, wanted to show him the scanner, the data, the truth, but something held him back. Krell was his friend, but Krell was also a warrior of the Empire. Could he be trusted? "I helped a starving child," Vorak said carefully. "That's all. That's not all. And we both know it. You accessed classified files about New Seattle. You went back to Velcor 9 during your shore leave. You're looking for something, and whatever it is, it's making Command nervous. Maybe they should be nervous." Krell stared at him, and for a moment, Vorak thought he saw understanding in his friend's eyes. But then Krell shook his head. "Be careful what you say, Vorak. Wolves have sensors, and warriors have loyalties that go beyond friendship." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I hope you know what you're doing, because once you start down this path, there's no coming back." After Krell left, Vorak sat in the darkness of his quarters, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Tomorrow, he would face an inquiry. Tomorrow he would have to answer questions about his loyalty, his actions, his fitness to serve. Tomorrow the Empire would decide if he was worthy of being a warrior. But tonight, Vorak had a different decision to make. He pulled the scanner out from under his sleeping platform and stared at it, this small device that contained evidence of his people's greatest shame. He thought about Sarah Chen, dying slowly in a maintenance corridor, keeping this secret safe for years. He thought about Lyra, begging with a scanner she didn't know held the power to topple an empire. He thought about 3,000 humans who had died for no reason except that they existed. And he thought about what kind of warrior he wanted to be, not the kind who followed orders without question, not the kind who killed without mercy, not the kind who walked past starving children without caring. Vorak stood and left his quarters. He walked through the ship's corridors with purpose, heading for the command deck. He knew what he had to do. It was insane. It was suicide. It was the right thing, and sometimes that was enough. When he reached the command deck security checkpoint, the guard looked at him suspiciously. "What's your business here, warrior?" "I need to speak with Captain Dromath," Vorak said. "I have evidence of a security breach that requires immediate attention." The guard hesitated, then nodded and activated his comm unit. After a brief conversation, he gestured Vorak forward. "The captain will see you, but you'll be scanned for weapons first." Vorak submitted to the security scan, knowing it wouldn't detect the scanner in his pouch. Data devices were common enough among warriors that they rarely drew attention. He was escorted to the captain's ready room, a spacious chamber decorated with trophies from a dozen campaigns. Captain Dromath sat behind a massive desk, his scales the deep green of old jade, his eyes sharp and calculating. He was old for a warrior, at least 60 cycles, but his body was still powerful, his presence commanding. "Warrior Vorak," Dromath said, his voice like grinding stone. "I understand you have information about a security breach?" "Yes, Captain." Vorak stepped forward, his heart pounding. "I have evidence that relates to the New Seattle incident 10 years ago, evidence that has been classified and hidden from general knowledge." Dromath's eyes narrowed. "And how did you come by this evidence?" "It was given to me by a human survivor of the massacre. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dromath stood slowly, his full height impressive even among Krythaxians. "Choose your next words very carefully, warrior," he said softly, "because what you're suggesting could be considered treason." Vorak took a deep breath, pulled the scanner from his pouch, and placed it on the captain's desk. "Then I suppose, Captain, that I'm a traitor." Captain Dromath stared at the scanner on his desk, as if it were a live explosive. For a long moment, the only sound in the ready room was the distant hum of the ship's engines and Vorak's labored breathing. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Dromath's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it that made Vorak's scales prickle with instinctive fear. "Yes, Captain." "No." Dromath moved around the desk, his movements slow and deliberate. "I don't think you do. You've just walked into my ready room and confessed to consorting with the enemy, accessing classified information, and possessing evidence that could implicate the Empire in war crimes. Any one of those offenses is enough to have you executed. Combined?" He leaned closer, his breath hot against Vorak's face. "You've signed your death warrant." "I understand, Captain." "Then why are you here? Why didn't you just destroy the scanner and forget you ever saw it?" It was the same question Vorak had been asking himself since leaving Sarah's compartment. He could have thrown the scanner into a waste recycler, could have walked away, could have let the truth stay buried with the 3,000 dead humans who couldn't speak for themselves. But he hadn't. "Because they were unarmed, Captain," Vorak said quietly. "I read the official report. I know what it says. But I also saw the inconsistencies, the timeline that doesn't match, the weapon signatures that prove the humans never fired a shot. And when I met the survivor, when I heard her story," he trailed off, searching for words. "I realized that what happened at New Seattle wasn't war, it was murder. And I can't pretend that doesn't matter." Dromath studied him with those ancient, calculating eyes. Then, unexpectedly, he reached out and picked up the scanner. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," the captain said. "I haven't decided which." He turned the scanner over in his hands, examining it. "What's on this device?" "Encrypted data from the New Seattle colony, communication logs, sensor readings, visual records, everything that proves the colony never attacked the Imperial Patrol, everything that proves we destroyed them without provocation." "We?" "The Empire, Captain. Our Empire." Dromath set the scanner back down and returned to his seat behind the desk. He was silent for a long time, his clawed fingers steepled in front of his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was weary. "Sit down, Vorak." Vorak sat, confused. He'd expected immediate arrest, interrogation, perhaps a summary execution. He hadn't expected this strange, contemplative mood from his commanding officer. "I was there," Dromath said suddenly, "at New Seattle." "Did you know that?" Vorak's heart stuttered. "No, Captain. I was a young commander then, leading a patrol squadron in the Velcor sector. We received orders from High Command to investigate a human colony that had allegedly fired on an Imperial vessel." Dromath's eyes grew distant. "We arrived expecting a military installation. What we found was a farming settlement, families, children, civilians with mining equipment and agricultural domes." "What did you do?" "I questioned the orders. I asked for verification, for proof that these humans posed a threat." Dromath's voice hardened. "I was told that questioning orders was tantamount to treason, that the Empire's intelligence was beyond reproach, that humans were inherently deceptive and dangerous, and that any settlement could be hiding weapons. But they weren't. No, they weren't." Dromath stood and walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars. "I watched the orbital bombardment from my command ship. I watched those agricultural domes collapse. I heard the screams over the open comm channels. And when it was over, when we sent ground forces to confirm the kill count, I saw what we'd done." He turned back to face Vorak, and for the first time, the young warrior saw something unexpected in his captain's eyes. Shame. 3,000 beings, Vorak, dead in 6 minutes. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people trying to survive in a hostile universe. And we killed them because High Command wanted to send a message, because the Empire needed to remind humanity that resistance was futile, because it was expedient. Then you know the official report is a lie. Of course I know. I helped write it. Dromath's admission hung in the air like smoke. I falsified the records, changed the timeline, made it look like the humans had fired first. And I've lived with that decision for 10 years. Vorak stared at his captain, a warrior he'd admired and respected, and felt his entire worldview shifting. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what kind of empire you serve, what kind of warriors we've become." Dromath returned to his desk and sat heavily. The Krythaxian Empire was founded on strength, Vorak, on honor in combat, on the principle that the strong should lead and the weak should follow. But somewhere along the way we forgot that strength without honor is just tyranny, that conquest without purpose is just slaughter. What happened to the survivors? Vorak asked. The ones who escaped in the shelters. We never found them. The ground forces did a sweep, but somehow 43 humans vanished. I always wondered where they went, how they got off the planet. Dromath looked at the scanner. Now I know. They had help from a trader. And one of them was smart enough to preserve the evidence. Sarah Chen, the colony's chief engineer. Is she still alive? Barely. She's sick, starving, living in a maintenance corridor on Velcor 9 with her daughter. The same daughter I gave credits to 3 days ago. Dromath nodded slowly, as if pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. The child with the scanner. That's why Threkis filed a complaint. He saw you help her and thought you were weak. But really you were just unlucky enough to stumble onto the truth. Or lucky enough, Vorak said quietly. That depends on what happens next. Dromath picked up the scanner again. I could destroy this right now. Have you arrested and executed for treason? File a report saying you suffered a psychological breakdown and posed a threat to ship security. That would be the easy solution, the safe solution. But you won't. How do you know? Because you're telling me all of this. Because you've been carrying this guilt for 10 years. Because you're not the kind of warrior who destroys evidence to save his own reputation. Vorak leaned forward. You're the kind who wrote that falsified report and has regretted it every day since. Dromath laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. You're presumptuous for a third-rank warrior. I'm honest, Captain. There's a difference. Is there? Dromath set the scanner down and pulled up his terminal interface. Do you know what will happen if I decrypt this data? If I access the files? You'll see the truth. I already know the truth. What I'll see is evidence, proof, something that can be transmitted, copied, distributed, something that could destroy careers, end lives, topple sections of high command. Dromath's claws hovered over the keyboard. Once I open this file, there's no going back, for either of us. I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you've thought this through, Vorak. Even if we expose this massacre, even if we prove the Empire lied, what do you think will happen? Do you think High Command will suddenly develop a conscience? Do you think they'll apologize to the humans and promise never to do it again? No, Vorak admitted. But the galaxy will know. Other species will know. And maybe, just maybe, it will make them think twice before trusting Imperial promises. It will also start a war, not with humans. They're too scattered and broken to fight back. But with the other species who've been watching us, wondering if they're next. The Velcarians, the Mentari, the Draconian Confederacy, they've all tolerated the Empire's expansion because they believed we operated under some kind of honorable code. If they learn we massacred a civilian population and lied about it, Dromath shook his head. The galaxy will turn against us. Good. The word came out before Vorak could stop it. Dromath's eyes snapped to his face, and for a moment the captain looked genuinely shocked. Good? He repeated. Yes, Captain. Good. Because maybe we deserve it. Maybe an empire built on lies and massacres should fall. Maybe it's time for something better. Dromath stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then slowly he began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then grew into genuine amusement that shook his massive frame. You're insane, he said finally. Absolutely insane. But I think I like you, Vorak. Does that mean you'll help me? Dromath's laughter faded and his expression became serious again. It means I'll decrypt the data. I'll look at the evidence, and then I'll decide what to do with it. He entered his command override codes into the terminal and connected the scanner. But understand this, warrior. If I choose to expose this truth, I'm choosing to destroy my career, my reputation, and possibly my life. The Empire doesn't forgive traitors. And that's what we'll be. I know, Captain. Then let's see if the truth is worth dying for. The terminal screen flickered as the decryption process began. Vorak watched the progress bar crawl across the display, his heart's pounding so hard he thought they might burst from his chest. After what felt like an eternity, the screen cleared and data began to scroll past. Communication logs, sensor readings, visual recordings. Dromath pulled up the first video file and played it on the main view screen. The image showed a peaceful settlement from orbit, agricultural domes glowing in the sunlight, small structures clustered around a central hub, fields of green stretching across the barren landscape. Text at the bottom identified it as New Seattle Colony, Day 1847 of operation. Then the recording jumped forward. The timestamp showed 6 minutes later. The settlement was gone. In its place was a smoking crater. The agricultural domes collapsed, the structures flattened, everything burning. Dromath played another file. This one was from a ground-level camera, showing the interior of one of the domes just before the bombardment. Vorak saw humans working, men and women in coveralls tending to crops, laughing and talking, children playing in the background. Then the screen went white. Dromath closed the file and pulled up the sensor logs. Vorak couldn't read all the technical data, but he understood enough. The logs showed no weapons signatures from the colony, no defensive fire, no aggressive action of any kind. The humans had been unarmed and unprepared. They'd never seen it coming. "There's more," Dromath said quietly. He opened a communication log, and a voice filled the ready room. Human, male, desperate. "Repeat, we are a civilian colony. We have no weapons. Please, whoever you are, we mean no harm. We're farmers, for God's sake. We have children here. Please don't—" The transmission cut off mid-sentence, replaced by static. Dromath closed the file and sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. For a long time he said nothing. Then he looked at Vorak. "I watched this happen," he said softly. "I heard these transmissions in real time, and I did nothing to stop it. I followed my orders. I trusted that High Command knew what they were doing, and then I helped cover it up because I was afraid, because I wanted to protect my career, because I told myself that one massacre didn't matter in the grand scheme of things." "Captain, don't." Dromath held up a hand. "Don't make excuses for me. Don't tell me I was following orders, or that I couldn't have known. I knew, Vorak. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. That's what makes it unforgivable." He stood and walked to the viewport again, his massive frame silhouetted against the stars. "I have a choice now," he said. "I can destroy this data, have you executed, continue living with my shame and my secrets, or I can do what I should have done 10 years ago. I can tell the truth." "What will you do, Captain?" Dromath turned to face him, and Vorak saw something in his captain's eyes that he'd never seen before. Resolution, purpose, peace. "I'm going to make it right," Dromath said. "Or die trying." He moved back to the terminal and began typing rapidly. "I'm copying this data to every secure drive I have access to. Multiple backups, multiple locations. Then I'm going to encrypt it with my personal codes and transmit it to several news networks, independent journalists and diplomatic channels outside Imperial control. They'll kill you for that. Yes, they will. Probably you too." Dromath glanced at Vorak. "You can still walk away from this. Tell say I found the scanner during a routine inspection of your quarters, that you didn't know what was on it. I can protect you, at least partially." Vorak thought about Sarah Chen, dying slowly in that tiny compartment. He thought about Lyra, begging in the concourse with a scanner she didn't understand. He thought about 3,000 humans who died without dignity, without justice, without anyone to speak for them. "No, Captain," he said firmly. "I'm with you, whatever happens." Dromath nodded, something like pride crossing his features. "Then we do this together." For the next hour, Vorak watched as his captain methodically copied and encrypted the data from the scanner. Dromath worked with the efficiency of someone who'd made peace with their decision, his movements calm and deliberate. "When this goes out," Dromath said as he worked, "High Command will respond immediately. They'll try to suppress it, discredit it, call it enemy propaganda. But the evidence is too solid, too detailed. Eventually the truth will spread. And then the galaxy changes. Maybe for better, maybe for worse, but it won't be the same galaxy we knew." Dromath finished the final encryption and cued the transmissions. "These will go out in 12 hours. Delayed broadcast, multiple channels, impossible to trace back to the source before they're already dispersed. By the time High Command realizes what's happened, it'll be too late to stop it." He turned to Vorak. "Go back to Velcor 9, find Sarah Chen and her daughter. Get them somewhere safe. If High Command realizes they're the source of this information, they'll kill them. What about you, Captain?" "I'll stay here. I need to maintain appearances for a few more hours. Act like nothing's wrong. Give the transmissions time to deploy." Dromath's expression softened slightly. "And I need to face what's coming. I owe those 3,000 humans that much." Vorak stood at attention and saluted, a gesture of respect between warriors. "It's been an honor serving under you, Captain." "The honor was mine, Vorak. Now go, and remember, what we're doing today, what we're sacrificing, it's not about us. It's about making sure those 3,000 voices are finally heard." Vorak took the original scanner and left the ready room. As he walked through the corridors of the Crimson Talon, He knew he was seeing his home for the last time. He'd never serve on this ship again, never see his quarters, never train with his fellow warriors, never feel the rush of combat or the pride of victory. But he'd done something more important. He'd chosen honor over obedience, truth over comfort, and humanity over empire. When he reached the shuttle bay, Krell was waiting for him. "I heard you went to see the captain," Krell said, his expression unreadable. "That took courage, or stupidity. I'm still not sure which." "Neither am I," Vorak admitted. "Are you coming back?" "I don't know." Krell studied him for a moment, then stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Whatever you're doing, whatever you've gotten yourself into, I hope it's worth it. Because Commander Thrakis is already spreading rumors that you've been compromised by human sympathies. If you don't return soon, they'll declare you a deserter." "Let them." Krell's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Vorak clasped Krell's shoulder. "Thank you for being a friend, for warning me, for caring." "Vorak, wait!" But Vorak was already boarding the shuttle. As the airlock sealed and the engines powered up, he looked back one last time at the Crimson Talon, his home, his life, everything he'd ever known. Then he launched into the void and set course for Velcor 9. He had 2 humans to save, and 12 hours before the galaxy learned the truth about what the Krythaxian Empire had done to New Seattle. 12 hours before everything changed. Vorak's shuttle touched down on Velcor 9 with less than 11 hours until the transmissions deployed. He moved through the station corridors with purpose, ignoring the stares of other beings who watched a Krythaxian warrior striding toward the maintenance levels. Warriors didn't go to those places. Warriors didn't concern themselves with the forgotten corners where humanity huddled in the dark. But Vorak wasn't just a warrior anymore. He wasn't sure what he was. He reached door 20 and knocked. No response. He knocked harder, urgency making his movements rough. "Sarah, Lyra, open up, it's Vorak." The door slid open a crack and Lyra's face appeared, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "You came back. I need to talk to your mother. Now." Lyra opened the door fully, and Vorak entered the cramped compartment. Sarah was sitting up on the bunk, looking slightly better than she had the day before. The medicine and food were working, giving her back some measure of strength. "Vorak," she said, her voice still weak but clearer. "I didn't think I'd see you again. I decrypted the data. My captain and I both saw it. Everything you said was true. The colony was unarmed. The massacre was unprovoked. The Empire lied." Vorak knelt beside the bunk, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "We're exposing it. Captain Dromath is transmitting the evidence to news networks and diplomatic channels across the galaxy. In 11 hours, everyone will know what happened at New Seattle." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus, oh God, Marcus, they'll finally know. They'll finally know you didn't die for nothing." Lyra moved to her mother's side, taking her hand. "Mama, your father," Sarah whispered, touching Lyra's face. "He tried so hard to keep everyone safe. He organized the colonists, built the greenhouses, taught people how to farm in low gravity. He made New Seattle beautiful, and when the bombardment started, he was trying to get people to the shelters. He died saving others." She looked at Vorak through her tears. "And now the galaxy will know he was a hero. Not a terrorist, not an enemy, a hero." "But we have a problem," Vorak said. "When High Command realizes the truth is out, they'll look for the source. They'll figure out the data came from a survivor, and they'll come looking for you." Sarah nodded, her brief moment of joy fading. "I expected that. I'm getting you off this station. Both of you. I have contacts. Warriors who owe me favors, traders who don't ask questions. I can get you to a neutral colony, somewhere outside Imperial space." "And then what?" Sarah asked. "We hide for the rest of our lives? We run every time the Empire gets close?" "You survive," Vorak said firmly. "You stay alive to see justice done, to see your husband's name cleared. Isn't that worth running for?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at this small, brave child who'd spent her entire life suffering because of the Empire's cruelty. Then she looked back at Vorak. "Get us off Velcor 9, she said. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." Vorak helped Sarah to her feet, while Lyra gathered their few possessions, the water canister, the remaining food, a bundle of clothes, and the scanner. Sarah was unsteady, leaning heavily on Vorak's arm, but she managed to walk. They moved through the maintenance corridors as quickly as Sarah's condition allowed. Vorak had contacted a Terran trader named Marcus Webb, who operated on the edge of legality, smuggling goods and people away from Imperial scrutiny. Webb owed Vorak for looking the other way during several cargo inspections, and now it was time to collect that debt. They reached the docking bay, where Webb's ship, the Phoenix Rising, was berthed. It was a battered freighter that had seen better decades, its hull patched and repaired so many times it looked like a quilt, but its engines were sound, and Webb was a skilled pilot. The trader was waiting at the airlock, a middle-aged human with graying hair and cautious eyes. When he saw Vorak approaching with Sarah and Lyra, his expression shifted from wariness to understanding. "So this is what you're cashing in that favor for," Webb said. "A dying engineer and a kid." "They're more than that," Vorak said. "They're the key to exposing the new Seattle massacre." Webb's eyes widened. "The massacre? I heard rumors, but I thought it was just anti-imperial propaganda." "It wasn't. It was real. And in 10 hours, the proof goes public." Vorak glanced at Sarah. "Sarah Chen is a survivor. She saved the evidence. Captain Dromath and I are making sure the galaxy sees it." Webb looked at Sarah with new respect. "New Seattle was your colony?" Sarah nodded. "My home. My husband died there." "Then you're braver than most, lady, coming forward after all these years." Webb gestured toward his ship. "Come on, I'll get you somewhere safe. No charge. Consider it payback for what the Empire did to our people." They boarded the Phoenix Rising, and Webb immediately began his pre-flight sequence. Vorak helped Sarah into a passenger seat and made sure Lyra was strapped in securely. "Where are you taking them?" Vorak asked. "Neutral colony called Haven's Rest. It's in the outer rim, far from Imperial patrols. Mostly humans and other refugees. They don't ask questions, and they don't cooperate with Krythaxian authorities." Webb looked up from his controls. "What about you? You coming with us?" Vorak hesitated. He could run, could disappear into the outer rim with Sarah and Lyra, leave his old life behind completely. But something held him back. "I need to go back to the Crimson Talon," he said. "Captain Dromath is facing this alone. I should be there with him." "That's suicide," Webb said flatly. "Probably, but it's the right thing to do." Sarah reached out and caught Vorak's arm. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were fierce. "You don't have to die for this, Vorak. You've already done more than anyone could ask. Your husband died trying to save others," Vorak said quietly. "Captain Dromath is sacrificing everything to expose the truth. How can I do less?" He gently removed her hand. "You and Lyra survive, that's all I ask. Live, thrive, build something beautiful. Make sure Marcus and all those others aren't forgotten." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Thank you, for everything, for seeing us, for caring, for being better than your empire." Lyra stood on her seat and threw her arms around Vorak's neck. "Don't die," she whispered fiercely. "Please don't die." Vorak held her carefully, this small human child who'd taught him more about courage than a lifetime of military training. "I'll try not to," he promised. He left the ship and watched as the Phoenix Rising sealed its airlock and powered up its engines. Within minutes, it was launching from the station, disappearing into the void. Sarah and Lyra were safe, at least for now. Vorak returned to his shuttle and set course back to the Crimson Talon. As he flew through space, he thought about everything that had happened. A week ago, he'd been a simple warrior, following orders without question, believing in the Empire's strength and righteousness. Now he was a traitor, a deserter, a warrior who'd chosen compassion over duty, and he'd never felt more at peace. The Crimson Talon loomed ahead, its massive bulk blocking out the stars. Vorak docked in the shuttle bay and made his way to the command deck. Warriors stared at him as he passed, their expressions ranging from confusion to hostility. Word of his actions had spread. Everyone knew he'd been called before the captain. Everyone knew he was under investigation. Nobody knew what was about to happen. Vorak reached the captain's ready room and entered without announcing himself. Dromath was standing at the viewport, his back to the door. The transmissions had been sent. Vorak could see the confirmation on the terminal screen. 9 hours until they deployed across the galaxy. "You came back," Dromath said without turning around. "Where else would I go? Somewhere safe, somewhere far from here." Dromath finally turned, and Vorak saw exhaustion in his captain's face. "Did you get the humans off the station?" "Yes. They're on their way to a neutral colony." "They'll be safe." "Good, that's good." Dromath moved to his desk and pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of Krythaxian fire wine. He poured generous amounts into both glasses and handed one to Vorak. "Drink with me, warrior. We don't have much time left." They drank in silence, the strong alcohol burning down Vorak's throat. It was a warrior's drink, traditionally shared before battle or after victory. Today it was neither. Today it was a farewell. "I've been thinking about my legacy," Dromath said. "What I'll leave behind when this is over. For 10 years I thought my legacy would be my service record, my kill count, my rise through the ranks. He laughed bitterly. Now my legacy will be exposing the Empire's greatest shame, and I find I'm more proud of that than anything I've done in 30 years of service. You're giving the dead their voice back, Vorak said. That's worth more than any military honor. Is it? We'll never know. We won't live to see the consequences. Dromath finished his drink and poured another. But I hope it matters. I hope those 3,000 humans didn't die for nothing. A chime sounded at the door. Dromath and Vorak exchanged glances. Enter, Dromath called. Commander Thrakis strode in, his face twisted with anger. Behind him were 4 security warriors, their weapons drawn. Captain Dromath, by order of High Command, you are under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and unauthorized access to classified materials. Warrior Vorak, you are also under arrest on the same charges. Dromath didn't seem surprised. That was faster than I expected. How did they know? We've been monitoring your terminal activity, Captain. When you accessed and copied classified files, it triggered automatic alerts to High Command. Thrakis' voice dripped with satisfaction. Did you really think you could betray the Empire and get away with it? I wasn't trying to get away with it, Dromath said calmly. I was trying to do the right thing. The right thing? Thrakis laughed. You're a traitor. You've disgraced this ship, this crew, and yourself. And for what? For humans. He spat the word like a curse. Vorak stepped forward. For truth, Commander. For justice. For 3,000 innocent beings who were murdered by our Empire. Innocent? Thrakis moved closer, his scales flushing red with rage. Humans are never innocent. They're vermin, weak, pathetic. They exist to serve or to die. That's all they're good for. They're people, Vorak said quietly. Just like us. They love, they grieve, they hope. They deserve to be treated with dignity. You're insane, both of you. Thrakis gestured to the security warriors. Take them to the brig. High Command wants them alive for a public trial. They want to make an example of what happens to traitors. As the security warriors moved forward, Dromath raised a hand. Wait, I have something to say. You have nothing to say that matters, Thrakis snarled. The transmissions are already sent, Dromath said calmly. Encrypted, delayed broadcast, multiple channels. In 8 hours, every news network in the galaxy will have full documentation of the new Seattle massacre. Sensor logs, communication records, video evidence. Everything that proves the Empire lied. The color drained from Thrakis' scales. You what? I exposed the truth, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You can arrest me, execute me, erase every trace of my existence, but those transmissions will deploy. The galaxy will know what we did. Thrakis stood frozen for a moment, his mind clearly racing. Then he activated his comm unit. Bridge, this is Commander Thrakis. Emergency order. Jam all outgoing communications within 100 parsec radius. Contact High Command immediately. Tell them we have a code black situation. Too late, Dromath said with a smile. The transmissions are already in transit. They're not broadcasting from this ship. They're coming from independent relay stations across 12 sectors. You'd have to shut down half the galaxy's communication network to stop them all. Thrakis' hand moved to his plasma pistol. Then you've just sentenced this entire ship to death. High Command will destroy the Crimson Talon to prevent the contamination from spreading. They'll say it was a reactor malfunction, an accident, and everyone on board will die because of your betrayal. No, Dromath said firmly. Everyone on board will die because the Empire values its lies more than its warriors, because High Command would rather kill 1,000 loyal soldiers than admit to one massacre. That's not my betrayal, Thrakis. That's yours. For a moment, Vorak thought Thrakis might shoot them both right there. The commander's hand trembled on his weapon, his eyes wild with rage and fear. But then the comm unit on Dromath's desk crackled to life. All hands, this is the bridge. We are receiving priority communication from High Command. Stand by for orders. The voice that came through next was cold and mechanical, processed through layers of encryption. Captain Dromath, Commander Thrakis, High Command is aware of the situation. The Crimson Talon has been compromised. All crew are ordered to evacuate immediately. The ship will be destroyed in 30 minutes to contain the security breach. Evacuation shuttles are authorized. This is not a drill. Thrakis stared at the comm unit in horror. They're going to destroy the ship. Yes, Dromath said quietly. They are, and they'll tell the galaxy it was an accident. Just like they told the galaxy New Seattle was self-defense. The Empire's lies never end. Captain, one of the security warriors said, his voice shaking. What do we do? Dromath looked at his crew. These warriors who'd served under him, trusted him, followed his orders. and he made his final decision as their commanding officer. "Evacuate," he said firmly. "Get to the shuttles. Get off this ship, all of you. That's an order." "What about you, sir?" the warrior asked. "I'm staying. This is my ship, my responsibility, my choice. Captain, we can't just—" "Yes, you can, and you will." Dromath's voice carried the weight of command, the authority of decades of service. "I gave the order to copy those files. I sent those transmissions. This is my burden to bear, not yours. Now go. Save yourselves. That's the last order I'll ever give you." The security warriors hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons and left the ready room. Within moments, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Evacuation protocols activated. Warriors ran for the shuttle bays, grabbing emergency supplies and personal belongings. Thraxis remained, his face ashen. "You've destroyed everything. The Empire, our honor, our future." "No," Dromath said. "I've given us a chance to rebuild, to be better, to remember that strength without honor is just tyranny." He looked at Thraxis with something like pity. "How you can stay and die with your lies, or you can evacuate with the truth, your choice." Thraxis stared at him for a long moment, then turned and fled. Vorak and Dromath stood alone in the ready room, listening to the chaos outside as the crew abandoned ship. "You should go too," Dromath said to Vorak. "There's no reason for both of us to die here." "Yes, there is," Vorak said simply. "You're my captain, and I'm your warrior. If you're staying, I'm staying." Dromath smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his exhaustion. "You're a good warrior, Vorak. Better than I ever was. Better than most of us will ever be." They moved to the viewport and watched as evacuation shuttles began launching from the Crimson Talon, small lights disappearing into the darkness. The ship felt emptier with each passing moment, the corridors growing quiet as the crew abandoned their home. "Do you think it will matter?" Vorak asked. "What we've done? Will it change anything?" "I don't know," Dromath admitted. "Maybe the Empire will survive this. Maybe they'll find a way to spin the truth, to make themselves look like victims instead of murderers. Maybe nothing will change at all. Then why did we do it? Because we had to. Because those 3,000 humans deserved someone to speak for them. Because Sarah Chen survived 10 years of poverty and sickness to keep that evidence safe. Because a little girl begged in a concourse with a scanner she didn't understand. Because sometimes doing the right thing is enough, even if it doesn't change the world." Dromath placed a hand on Vorak's shoulder. "We may not live to see justice done, but we've planted the seed. And seeds have a way of growing even in the darkest soil." The countdown timer on Dromath's terminal showed 15 minutes until the ship's destruction. Vorak thought about Sarah and Lyra, safe now on their way to Haven's Rest. He thought about Marcus Chen and the 3,000 colonists who died at New Seattle. He thought about all the humans scattered across the galaxy, trying to survive in a universe that saw them as worthless. And he hoped. He hoped that when the transmissions deployed in 7 hours, someone would care. Someone would listen. Someone would demand answers from the Krythaxian Empire. He hoped that his death would mean something. "Tell me about your hatching," Dromath said suddenly. "What was it like?" It was an odd question for their final moments, but Vorak understood. Dromath wanted to remember what life was before all of this, before the massacre, before the lies, before the choice that led them here. "I was one of 43 hatchlings in my creche," Vorak said. "We were trained from the moment we could walk. Combat, tactics, imperial history. They taught us that strength was everything, that the weak deserved their fate, that the Empire was the pinnacle of civilization. Do you still believe that?" "No. I believe we could have been. We should have been. But we chose conquest over compassion, power over justice, and that choice made us smaller, not stronger." Vorak looked out at the stars. "A little human girl taught me more about courage in 5 minutes than 4 years of military training ever did." "Then maybe there's hope for us after all," Dromath said. The timer reached 5 minutes. The ship's automated systems began shutting down non-essential functions, preparing for the final destruction. The lights dimmed. The temperature dropped. The Crimson Talon was dying. "It's been an honor serving with you, Captain," Vorak said. "The honor was mine, warrior." They stood together at the viewport, watching the stars, waiting for the end. And then, in those final moments, Dromath began to speak. He recited the names of the dead, all 3,000 colonists from New Seattle, their names pulled from Sarah's data files. Marcus Chen, Elizabeth Rodriguez, David Kim, Sarah O'Connor. Names upon names, each one a life ended, a story cut short, a future stolen. Vorak listened and remembered. When the Empire's weapon struck the Crimson Talon, when the ship exploded in a brief nova of light and energy, those names were the last words spoken on its bridge. And across the galaxy, in hidden relay stations and communication hubs, encrypted transmissions prepared to deploy, to tell a story the Krythaxian Empire wanted buried, to give voice to the dead, to demand justice for New Seattle. 7 hours later, the transmissions went live. The news spread like wildfire across every inhabited world. Video evidence, sensor logs, communication records, everything that proved the New Seattle massacre had been unprovoked, that the colony had been unarmed, that the Empire had lied about everything. Reactions varied by species. The Valkyrians demanded investigations. The Mentari withdrew their ambassadors from Imperial space. The Draconian Confederacy issued a formal condemnation. And among the scattered human populations across the galaxy, something stirred that hadn't existed in years. Hope, unity, anger, purpose. On Haven's Rest, Sarah Chen watched the news broadcasts from a medical facility where she was finally receiving proper treatment. Lyra sat beside her, holding her hand, watching as their scanner's data transformed the galactic political landscape. "They know, Mama," Lyra whispered. "The whole galaxy knows what happened to Daddy." "Yes, baby, they know." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "And it cost 2 more lives. 2 good warriors who chose truth over empire. Will it change anything?" Sarah thought about that question for a long time. Would it matter? Would it change anything? She looked at her daughter, this child who'd survived starvation and despair, who'd begged in a concourse with desperate hope, who'd been saved by a warrior who chose compassion over cruelty. "Yes," Sarah said finally, "it will change everything. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the seed has been planted, the truth is out, and truth once freed cannot be caged again." She squeezed Lyra's hand. "We're going to rebuild, baby. We're going to organize. We're going to show the galaxy that humanity might be broken, but we're not defeated. We're going to hold the Krythaxian Empire accountable, and we're going to build something better in the ashes. For your father, for Vorak, for Captain Dromath, for everyone who died at New Seattle." Lyra nodded, her small face set with determination. "What do we do first? First we heal, then we remember, then we fight. Not with weapons, not with violence, but with truth, with witnesses, with documentation, with justice." Sarah looked at the news broadcast, at the images of New Seattle's destruction playing across every screen in the galaxy. "And we make sure those 3,000 names are never forgotten." Across the galaxy, other humans were having similar conversations. The scattered refugees and laborers, the forgotten survivors and second-class citizens, they watched the evidence spread and felt something awaken inside them. They began to organize, to communicate, to remember that they were more than what the galaxy told them they were. They were human, and humans, as the war had proven and Vorak had learned, were survivors. The Krythaxian Empire tried to contain the damage. They discredited the evidence, claimed it was fabricated, arrested warriors who spoke publicly about New Seattle. But the truth was out, and truth, once freed, cannot be caged again. Political alliances shifted. Trade agreements were questioned. Species that had tolerated the Empire's expansion began to reconsider their positions. The Krythaxian High Command found itself isolated, defending actions they'd hoped would stay buried forever. And in the maintenance corridors and refugee camps, in the forgotten spaces where humans survived, a memorial began to take shape. 3,000 names: Marcus Chen, Elizabeth Rodriguez, David Kim, Sarah O'Connor, all of them remembered, honored, mourned, and 2 more names added to the list: Captain Dromath of the Crimson Talon, warrior Vorak, 3rd rank, who chose compassion over duty and paid the ultimate price for his choice. Years would pass, decades, generations, but the story would endure. The story of a little girl who begged in a concourse, of a scanner that held hidden truth, of a warrior who stopped when he didn't have to, of a captain who chose honor over lies, of a mother who kept the evidence safe for 10 years, waiting for someone brave enough to care. They would call it the New Seattle Revelation, the moment when the galaxy learned that strength without honor was just tyranny, that the weak could become strong through truth. That justice delayed was not justice denied, and they would remember that sometimes, when you buy a scanner from a starving child, you change the galaxy forever. In the end, Dromath had been right. They had planted a seed, and from that seed, in the darkest soil imaginable, a forest began to grow, a forest of hope, of justice, of remembrance, a forest where 3,000 voices, long silenced, could finally be heard. And in that forest, 2 Krythaxian warriors stood alongside 3,000 human colonists, their names carved in stone and memory, proof that courage transcends species, that honor matters more than empire, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply care when everyone tells you not to. Sarah and Lyra Chen lived to see that forest grow. They lived to see humanity rebuild. They lived to see the Krythaxian Empire reform, to see young warriors citing Vorak and Dromath as examples of true honor, to see a galaxy slowly, painfully, learning that compassion is not weakness, but the greatest strength of all. And on the anniversary of New Seattle's destruction every year, humans across the galaxy observed a moment of silence. 3,000 names spoken aloud, 2 warriors remembered with gratitude, and one simple truth acknowledged, that a little girl with a scanner, a dying mother with evidence, and a young warrior with a conscience had changed everything. Not because they were powerful, not because they were invincible, but because they refused to let the darkness win. And sometimes in a universe full of cruelty and indifference, that refusal is enough to light the way forward. The end.